The next lesson I'd like to show you in throwing clay is throwing clay on the wheel is pulling a tall cylinder. Now the tools that you'll need in pulling a tall cylinder are basically a sponge, the pin tool. This time what you'll need is a metal rib, and that'll help out with that too. So this time what you need is you need 5 pounds of clay. I'll have it for you to measure out. I have a scale set up, just use that, and that way you can pretty much measure out each time 5 pounds of clay. Wedge it up. Make sure that this clay is wedged up really well. I'd say wedge this about 15 to 20 times. You can't wedge it enough. Well, you maybe could, but okay, but make sure it's wedged up. Get into a ball shape. And this stuff you're going to really have to make sure is thrown down on the wheel really good. Get it right in the center of our wheel. Easy as that. Okay, get the wheel spinning. Add some water. This thing really spinning fast. Now there's going to be some different speeds you use in throwing this cylinder because it's going to be a little different than just pulling the small bowl shapes. Cone it up, push it down. Cone it up, push it down. About 3 times. 3 times does wonders for getting this thing centered. Now again, the coning is getting it centered, and if there's any air in it, it helps bring that to the surface. Now let me show you from here. Again, there's coning it up. And bring it down. Use your thighs as much as possible. That's going to help you a whole lot. Then make sure it's very, very centered, because this process is going to take the clay being as centered as much as possible, because anything that's off-centered will show up later on in the throwing process. Okay, compress the clay right here a little bit. Then you can start the indent or your opening in the middle. Make sure you go down nice and even, and go within about a ½ inch to the base of the piece. If you go all the way to the bottom, the chances are good that the sides will pull right off. It makes it a lot harder to throw that way too. Okay, then open it up here. A good determiner to tell how thick the base is to take a pin tool. And what you're going to do is you're going to use it as a gauge. If you take this pin tool and push into the bottom while it's spinning, find the very center, push down until it stops, you can find out. Now that's a good thickness, but if you can come down to about that thickness right about there would be really good. So I'm going to go down a little bit farther. Okay, now these don't have to be very beautiful at all. All I'm looking for is a tall cylinder, the tallest that you can pull. The first few don't have to be, but maybe like this tall, but you keep working up from there. Then, what you're going to do here is, I still use my hands against each other. The outside is going to be like kind of caliper claw kind of things that you're going to come in like this. And most of the work is done with your outside hand pulling toward the inside. You want this thing to be cone shape. You don't want it to go bowl shape. So when you pull toward the center, like this. The second pull, again, you pull toward the center. Make sure that the clay is really wet. Otherwise, you're going to be dealing with some dry material, which is going to pull your hand way off center right away. Second pull. Nice, even, slow. Don't try to pull this thing up too fast. And see how the wheel's spinning about half speed. If it's spinning full speed, that's going to make it a lot harder. Here I'm going to show you a neat little thing. If you cut into this base with a pin tool, or you can use a wooden tool with a point to it. Go in here, stop the wheel, and take this thing out. This gives you a little bit of room for your fingers underneath to pull that clay up. The wheel spinning again, about half speed again, right here. Reach underneath, pull that extra clay up right there. This wheel's a little too fast, right about there. See how I've got my arm anchored to my hip or my thigh right there? That helps a whole lot. The outside really wet. Hands nice and even. Something else is happening here. At the bottom right here, the clay is probably like that thick. Up here, the clay is very thin. So I do what's called a 2/3 pull. My hands go all the way through the motions, but when I get to the bottom, I pull up a lot of clay, but when I get right here, I start pulling about half, and when I get here, my hands are just basically gliding across the clay. So I'm not pulling up much clay here at all. Most of the clay pulling is down here, but it's important to follow through the whole pull. Pull. Well, that's interesting. Pull it all the way up. You can see how tall you can get these things. This thing really wet. Let's see. You're gonna have to play with the speed to find out exactly what you like, but definitely not too fast on these things. This is my last pull, by the way. Now, say for instance it's still too wide, you can do what's called choking. That's where you take your hands, you're going to take your hands and go around the outside and kind of compress it and bring your hands up evenly. But you've got to make sure that the clay again is wet. This process, it's spinning fairly evenly. So like if I were to compress it a little bit, you can bring it up like this, nice and even. Don't compress too much all at once, otherwise you'll have a major problem on your hands. Then you can press it again. And you can do it again. But I'll bring it back out because the cylinder I'm only looking for is going to be like that. Now, there's a lot of neat things you can do with these things. Say you really like this, you want to keep it, you can take this metal rib. If you take this metal rib, you can clean up the outside by pressing on the inside against that rib, and always hold your rib at an angle going away from the clay, so it's going to be like this on the clay. Let's see how you can get this nice straight cylinder. If you use the round side, you can do some neat stuff like this and bend this thing around a little bit. Now, some of the other things you can do is like take this wooden tool, maybe you want to put a nice groove in it. But all I'm looking for in a cylinder is don't worry that you have to throw it this tall to begin with. You don't. You can just, I'm just looking for cylinders that are maybe this tall right here and nicely finished. I'm trying to teach you how to pull a taller piece at this point. So I want you to experiment with it. Try to get 5 cylinders in this unit if you can that are fairly tall, at least your tallest 5 cylinders. Clean up the top with a sponge, clean up the inside. These don't have to be trimmed. I'm just looking for cylinders on this one. Make sure it's all cleaned out. You can take your pin tool, trim off that extra junk at the bottom. Go on the inside, pull that stuff off. I'll try to pull that stuff off. But pull the fish line through. Make sure that it's on the bottom of the bat, this fish line. Otherwise you might pull through the bottom of your piece, which isn't entirely bad, but if you want to use it for a pencil holder or something, it's best to have it on the bottom. And then you can just take this bat. Don't worry about taking this piece off. Leave it on the bat. Take this, if this bat sticks to the bucket head, the way to do it is to slide your hand underneath and use your hand, your wrist as a leverage, and it'll pop up a little bit by going around like that. And then just set this on a shelf so it can dry. And then make sure that your name is on the bottom too.